Jumping from planes with parachutes was a new type of warfare at the time. It was risky, but it was an integral part of the operation. The American 101st and 82nd Airborne Division would land behind German lines to capture ground inland from Utah Beach. Meanwhile, the British 6th Airborne would secure bridges over the River Orne and the Cayenne Canal. So, heavily guarded and nervous, the paratroops boarded their C-47s, not knowing what to expect.
Over German territory, the planes took fire from German anti-aircraft guns. Some soldiers were hit, unable to make the jump. The majority, though, made it. But because of the heavy fire directed at the planes, some troops were not dropped at their correct DZs, or drop zones. Despite this, the number of paratroopers behind enemy lines confused the Germans. All soldiers worked hard to link up with their comrades, as well as find supplies that were lost during the drop. Although everything did not go completely to plan, the airborne played a very important role in the invasion of Hitler's fortress Europe. Meanwhile, the Allied Armada steamed across the English Channel. It included over 5,300 vessels, a combination of 174 battleships, destroyers, and cruisers, 2,000 landing craft, and other vehicles. At 0500 hours, 5 o'clock a.m., the infantrymen had all been loaded onto the landing craft and headed towards the awaiting Germans. On Omaha Beach, troops were wrongly told that defenses were weak, but as the first troops set foot on the sand, a rain of gunfire held down from a network of formidable defenses atop the bluff. The men quickly learned, through pain and death, that the naval bombardment had not done the intended damage. To augment this problem, the amphibious tanks that had meant to go ashore prior to the troops had gone missing in action, and therefore the German defenses were still very much alive and active. Entire units were simply cut down as their landing craft approached the beach, their bodies riddled with bullets and shrapnel from demolished boats. As more and more soldiers landed, the beach became congested and the landings were paused. The shore was teeming with trapped American soldiers at the mercy of the Nazis. The soldiers' confident swagger soon turned into shaking and terror as they realized that they would have to wrestle with death for every inch of bloody sand on Omaha Beach.
Utah Beach began with remarkable success. The bombardment, while not inflicting heavy damage, seriously shook the green German recruits who defended the beach, and the first American raids could land with little resistance. However, one component went seriously wrong. The men landed a kilometer south of their intended target, which explained the light German resistance. It turned out to be somewhat of a blessing, though. The men were to set up beachhead and from there direct other troops to their location, and then fight their way inland. As a result, the casualties would be lower than anticipated. On Sword Beach, the British were making far better progress than on Omaha. Although the German resistance was fierce, it was not enough to deter the steady Brits from slowly advancing. The first few minutes, the deadly metal of war screamed into the infantrymen, killing 200 within the first few minutes, but then the British tanks came ashore and aided the British in securing the beach so that they could start to move on the town. Meanwhile, on Gold Beach, the British were also making steady progress. The bombing here had an extra hour to do its deadly work, and consequently the soldiers landing had mostly mines to contend with. Soon, they too were fighting the Germans in the town, having successfully secured the beachhead. Juno Beach, which belonged mostly to the Canadians and some British, was a messy affair, but ultimately successful. In the first few hours, as men landed, the German fire simply devastated the troops. 1 in 19 men died in the first raise, as compared to 1 in 18 at Omaha. Juno and Omaha were the deadliest of the beaches, but the key difference was that Juno was more successful in accomplishing its mission. By nightfall, the Allies had landed 21,400 men and 3,200 vehicles at Juno, with a loss of only 335 men, most of which were lost in the initial attack. The Americans lost around 2,000 men on Omaha and around 3,000 to 5,000 overall, while the Canadians fared better with fewer than 500 mortalities. The British deaths ranged from 2,500 to 3,000. The Germans, on the other hand, lost between 6,000 and 10,000 men within the first 24 hours. It was, overall, a very, very bloody day.
Despite the casualties, D-Day was an extremely important and successful day in World War II. We can learn a lot from the gutsy initiative and flexibility of the landing troops, which are a shining example of courage even to this day. The Normandy landings also had a military influence, proving that seaborne invasion was not only possible, but could be a brilliant tactical maneuver. The landings allowed the Allies, after 5 long years of fighting on the defensive, to finally take the initiative in freeing Europe. Operation Overlord, the name given to the operation to take the French coast, was a success, and it was not long before the war was over, due mostly to the brave men who fought and died to liberate France. Ultimately, it was their sacrifice and valor that achieved a victory for Operation Overlord, and finally freed Europe from the stranglehold of the Axis power. The mutilated victims of the Holocaust, the oppressed citizens of all the Nazi-occupied countries, and the grieving widows of the men who would not return to their homes were truly and eternally thankful.